How good a deal do you think he got? How does it compare to some of the other, elite fighters that are in UFC? Is he in the top 15, or is he kind of just a mid-level guy?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of a deal he got. Part of the thing is that I don't think it wasn't the bidding war that he may have hoped for, because I think Strikeforce, from talking to people at Strikeforce, it was clear to me that they had decided they weren't going to go into a bidding war, even though he was their champion. They felt that, he had not proven himself to be marketable. So, if it got to big numbers, they were going to just let him go, and that's what happened.
So, I was reading some of the comments from the Wrestling Observer. You have pretty strong thoughts on Jake Shields. I think you're kind of along the same lines that you don't think he's that marketable, right?
The thing is that if you become a UFC champion, you're gonna eventually become marketable. That's just the thing of being in UFC. If he's successful enough, it's like Lyoto Machida at first wasn't marketable, but he won so many fights that he became marketable. But right out of the bat, no. I think it's going to take some. I don't think that he was that marketable coming off of the CBS exposure, even though he won a lot of fights on CBS. But people didn't really take to him. So, if he wins his fights, he'll be a star. But I don't think that he's walking in like, say, someone like Fedor would walk in, or someone else, would walk in and could walk in as already a ready-made star.
Dave Meltzer's with us. We're talking on Yahoo Sports, talking about the signing of Jake Shields. Hey, did you go as far as kind of saying that they almost have to be careful in the way they promote him, to the point where maybe they have to bury him on cards because they don't want to create false expectations that he's kind of a boring fighter?
Well, some of his fights are boring. It depends, because, again, he's going to get a chance. He's going to start with Martin Kampmann, who's Martin Kampmann usually has good fights. So he's got the opportunity to go in there and have a good fight, and if he wins, it'll move him up. So, that's a good one. If he's in with the wrong opponent, he could have really boring fights. And they've done this with even with Fitch and Yushin Okami, guys that are winning fighters with great records. They put them on undercards for various reasons, for fear of slowing the pace down on the live show. And with the wrong opponent, Fitch, Jake, definitely can be a guy like that. So they have to, but they're aware, but they're not dumb. You've got to, just make sure he's got the kind of an opponent that he's not going to be able to do that to.
I kind of like the signing, because I think from a, if you're looking ahead for future George St. Pierre opponents, I like the fact that Shields is a guy who will force George to stand up. Now, that may not be good for Shields, but I think Shields is one of the only guys out there who's kind of close to the same level on the grappling front as GSP.
Well, GSP told me himself that he thinks that Jake Shields is better on the ground than he is. And that might be that's the only time I've ever heard him say that about anyone. So that tells me that, he would, for his smart fight, it's to stand up with Jake Shields. And yeah, that would be, if nothing else, it'll be a very different St. Pierre fight. It'll probably test him, because I think at some point that fight is going to the ground, but I don't think that George is going to do what he's been doing with other people, which is immediately take it down and make sure to keep it down, and that's the goal of the whole fight. I think the goal of the fight would be, a little bit of everything. I don't think that, I think he's going to want to keep it standing, maybe go to the ground when he thinks the guy's tired, but not, not that whole ground fight. So yeah, and plus, again, it's a new, fresh opponent. If Shields wins, to me, I think it gets 2 good wins, and George is still the champion, that's a good new opponent, because, again, Fitch and Alves, the winner of that fight really should get a shot, but we've seen George against both those guys, and he won every round against both of them. So a new opponent would be, provided he beats Koscheck, a new opponent would be really good. So I think Shields is coming in for him at a pretty good time.
So if you were the UFC, you just mentioned 2 fights to help build Shields. If he, goes out there and in, 3 or 4 minutes just takes down Kampmann, twists him up, finishes him, can he get the GSP fight that quickly? Could he do it based on one fight, or do they need more time, more lead time to build him?
It depends on the I think it depends on the circumstances of time. If he goes in there and wins in 2 minutes, I would think that actually I would have him. if it works out, I might have him sit at that point because he'll be ready-made. If he goes in there and he struggles and it's a win, but it's not an impressive win, I think he might need. I think he would need another win at that point. So it all depends. You know, we know that St. Pierre's fighting Koscheck next December. So, and St. Pierre only doesn't want to fight that often. So we're really talking about next late spring, early summer. So I think he may have to get 2 fights in there no matter what, really. And again, if Fitch wins, it's really hard for me to justify Fitch not getting another shot just because it's so many wins in a row. And beating Alvis, who's such a top contender. The flip side is if Koscheck wins and Fitch wins, then we've got a real interesting thing because they should be offered that fight. There's a good chance that they'll turn it down, or there's certainly a chance they'll turn it down because nobody from AKA has ever fought anyone. And that may springboard Shields into a match with into a match with Koscheck actually quicker if things go in a certain way. It's all. I hate to go so far in advance because with UFC there's so many variables in every single match, but I could see it's possible he could do it in one, but it's more likely it's going to take 2 wins. And if he doesn't win both, then he's going to have a longer trip to get there because you lose in UFC, you lose your place in line.
So one last thing, do you agree with what Strikeforce did? Clearly their attitude is that losing their middleweight champ, the guy who beat their big free agent signee, Dan Henderson, isn't going to cripple them.
I think that right now, I don't know the financial situation of Strikeforce, but given that almost everyone in Strikeforce seemed to be on the same page with me on that one, I think that they probably all felt that. Breaking the bank to keep Jake Shields, even though he had a big win, I don't think he had that much momentum. So I would say, I think that they probably did the best thing, but I can see from the outside. The problem is you certainly don't want it to look like you're the feeder system. And, this guy beating, your second most popular fighter and then going on to UFC, I would have liked to avoid it at all costs, but there's a financial number where you just go, hey, it's just not worth it to us. And clearly by the fact that they didn't chase him that hard, the deal was over that number.
All right, Dave. Hey, we appreciate the analysis, and we'll talk to you again.
Okay, thanks.